And you're on.
Well, it is the noon hour, so welcome to our live broadcast of History 282, World War II. And I know that you can hear me and that you can see my screen. So today we'll work on updates, and then the content presentation will be on our updates. We know that our modules open on Monday. They close on Friday, Saturday no later than 11:59, and we'll do the grading on Sunday. All right, so now we're into week 15. Next week will be week 16. So we have next week. All right. And so what you need to do then is keep up the work in the modules, uh, keep up with the reading. I mean, that's critical to make sure that you get everything covered that we have in the modules. Go through the material that's there, the articles, the media material, and as well the audio podcast that are there. Those are all important parts of the each one of the modules. Now, just to give you an idea of what's coming up, then uh, next week on Wednesday, which is the 12th, I will open up the link for you so you can have an opportunity to look at the final exam study questions. The final exam study questions are the final exam questions, so you need to select three of those and to begin work. Then the following week, which starts May 17th, that is exam week. So there'll be no live broadcast during exam week. And on Wednesday, a week after next, on the 19th, I will open up the link for you to submit the three essay questions. And those questions should be based on material in the modules. Um, I'm going to have to try to get that out in an announcement. And the goal is to use the material in the modules. If not, the questions may not turn out the way everybody thinks they should turn out. So use the textbook that's there. It's excellent text material for you in the Gilbert book. And use the readings, the podcasts, and any of the media material that's there to answer the three questions. Then, when they're open on the 19th, they'll be open through the 21st, which is Friday. So you have 3 days Friday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday to answer and then submit the three questions, and then also complete and submit the paper. Right. So that's what we've got. You can pick any three questions from the study list of study questions. Now, if you've been here for the live broadcast and I give you takeaways, those are my questions. You can write on any of those, but we need three questions, not one, not two, but three. So when everything ends on the May 21st, it's going to be hard for me to kind of run down folks and say, oh, by the way, I'm missing something, because I will have 2 days, Saturday and Sunday, to grade all the essays and the papers for 7 classes and get them in on Monday morning. So I'm going to be a little busy on that. So I want to make sure everybody's knows the requirements that we have. All right, now what you should be doing, this is critical because this is an element that's oftentimes the deciding factor, and I want it to be deciding factor uh, on a very high um, point, and that's the paper. So we haven't been doing the material with these reflections because we've been focusing on the paper. So all of you that turned in papers, draft papers, I responded to you and got them either Saturday, Sunday, or Monday. I did that for all of my classes, and I had about 70% of the students of each class doing those. And so that's an important part. So what you have to do is you've got to make those corrections. The page allocations are critical. If you're short on the page allocations, you'll be short on the points. You need to meet those page allocations. Now you should be doing the final updates on the paper. Uh, you should do a little polishing on it. You should, make revisions, changes, all of that. I think I gave that to you last time. Revisions, it's Roman. It's a Latin word. I won't give you the Latin part of it, but it means simply looking at it again. So you need to look at it again, answering the questions, and make sure you've got the content down that you want, that you've got all the page allocations that are appropriate, and that you have what is called a selected bibliography. That's really important. If when I get to it, if it's works cited or references or things I looked at, you can lose points. And then it's going to be double space or triple space. It'll be all over, and there'll be more points, and that's not what you want to be, because those points will make a difference between an A and a B and a C, and a C and a D. And so you need to go to that Turabian tip sheet, and it's called selected bibliography, 2 words, and it needs to be all alphabetized by the author's last name. If the citation, you start with the first one and it's more than one line, then the second and third line are indented. And then you only have one space between each citation. Everything is justified to the left. The right side, you just let it go the way it is. It's called ragged. So look at the tip sheet, just follow that, and you'll be in perfect shape, because that's an important part of the paper. Number each page. Top right, you put your last name, comma, spell the word page out. No abbreviations. I mean, in the draft, I tried to go through those without going through each question that you put in, but your last name, comma, spell the word page out, comma, and then put one and consecutively all the way to the end. Now, in the paper, it's a formal paper. It's an academic paper, so no abbreviations. So if you have something like USA, United States of America, ships are underlined. You can italicize, you can use underlining, but that's important. And let's skip abbreviations, slang words, the word which, a lot. Got to have better vocabulary at this level. Um, a lot of things happen. You can use it in speaking, but not in the papers like that. So we got good, clean papers. Now, if you need more help, you can send me the paper anytime before the 21st, and I'll look at it again for you just to make sure that it's there. I would do much more in the normal classroom, but this is how you teach writing. Um, Years ago, I mean, I've had really good writing professors. I had probably the greatest Shakespeare's. I had all three of the greatest Shakespeare scholars. I was a student of theirs. One was Dr. Baker. Um, the other, tremendous J.B. Priestley. They taught me a lot about writing. In the same way, I mean, there's really no penalty. I mean, except for the final paper, they'd go over all the copy and how to put things together, how to make a statement, how to use evidence. Is wonderful. So you have questions that you have to answer. So you go through and make sure that they're cleaned up, and they read the way you want them. And I know for the drafts, but when you turn the final one in, you got to put spell checker on it. Proof the paper. Read it out loud to yourself. You just let people know I'll be reading my paper, or read it to others and see if they have any questions about it. You've got to really, that's the fine tuning and the polishing part of it. It's like anything else. It's the small details that really make it come alive for you. If you want to use visuals, I've got some putting pictures in of the crew members. That's fine too. Make sure you label them underneath what it is. Nothing major, but if this is the crew members of the Ye Old Pub, that's fine. Or the Memphis Belle, whatever, or whatever submarine, the Tang, some of the others. Very interesting to read a lot of the papers. So what you want to do is make sure that you can polish it up and that you've answered all of the questions and you've looked at some others. Folks say, well, I can't find anything. I said, you should look in the census. The what? The U.S. Census. Oh. So you got to reach out, libraries, Harper Library, Public Library. I can't find anything on my soldier. Where is he from? He's from Norfolk, like Norfolk, Nebraska. There's newspaper articles. There's a high school there. There's a public library. Send them an email. call them on the phone, and they'll be happy to find things to get more material. I saw so many coming through that there's more. They had more than enough newspaper articles. Oh, it was just wonderful to see them all after the war, and so the National Archives would have their enlistment information, their dog tag number, all those things will be there. You don't have to get them all, but you learn by reaching out and doing that kind of research. So you need to do that. Okay. Yeah, however you want to do the text, you can do it at the bottom for the photograph. You can do it right underneath the picture, whichever easiest for you. I'm not going to press uh, for you on that. There's formats for all of this according to the Trabian Style Manual, but at the level we're at, which is good. Um, we're only going to do so many, so that's enough. I don't want to overwhelm everyone, but there's ways to place photographs and pictures in a formal paper um, where you size them and they're all about the same size. So it's just one isn't bigger than the other. It's all making it a standard format. But you're fine on that. So I think we're in good shape as to what's coming up and how things generally will move forward. If you have questions, you can email me today. I'll get to you probably later. I've got other two meetings this afternoon that take me right to 4:30, like that. Okay, so I think that's all I need to do for us on the my part. Any questions that you have at this point before we get into the war in the Pacific? Okay, if anything comes up, you can interrupt Professor Harkins. I have a question. I'll stop, try to answer it. If not, go ahead and send me an email, and we'll go from there. The war in the Pacific. One of these days, I should just do a topics course about the war in the Pacific. Um, it's just as we spent a lot of time in North Africa and Sicily, and sometime in Italy, and then in France, and then we drove to Berlin with Eisenhower and stopped, and then we started up with Zhukov and Konev coming from the east, and what happened at the Bulge and Berlin. Now we're going to shift to the um, Japan at war, the war in the Pacific. Okay, well, to go through, I'm going to give you just kind of a general view of this, and we'll get into some details. This is a horrific operation as to what happens. We're fighting an enemy there, just as we fought in Europe, but we're fighting a long way from home, just like we fought in Europe. We're fighting in different climates. We've got different things to worry about. Both areas, we got salt water, but we're dealing with very hot temperatures. Uh, you need water supplies, materials. There's all kinds of disease that's there. There's all kinds of insects and snakes and all kinds of jungle climates that are there that affect troops that sometimes you really can't train for, but they learn. This is, you know, fighting on the job by the unit. Oftentimes, a lot of hand-to-hand combat that goes into it as well. But if you look at the map ghosted in the background, you can see the light purple areas, the expansion of the Japanese in the Pacific, and they are well-trained troops. Their fleet is almost as strong as the British fleet. And I think before they engaged the United States, the last naval battle they lost was in the year 1540. Was the last naval battle they lost until um, we get to um, the Coral Sea, and then we get to the Midway, and things will change a little bit there for us. Millions of troops were tied down in China. And I do a lot in my Far East class, history of China classes. When Chiang Kai shek was there and keeping a lot of these troops tied down, that helped the United States and the British and our allies in the Pacific. Because Chiang Kai shek would sting them like mosquitoes, and they still have to, keep troops there and come after him. And it wasn't until the end of the war that they started moving troops out of China. They moved them from China to Korea, and from Korea down into Vietnam, into Southeast Asia, Indochina, Cochin. They moved them in those areas as well, and eventually out into the Pacific. But these troops were tied down there. In the duration, Japan had manufacturing plants there. They'd been settling individuals in China in the 20s and 30s. And basically, um, China fought Japan longer than anybody else. They started fighting Japan in 1937 and didn't end until the war ended in 1945. Okay. Aeronautical industry lacked equipment for mass production. Wonder why they were behind sometimes in planes. A Zero's a tough plane to take down. Luckily, we figured out how to do that. We captured a few, two of them in Alaska, flew them back to the United States, and we taught our pilots. There's only one area where they're really vulnerable. One of the planes was damaged in a crash, and I think the other one after the war, something happened to it. But we learned how to fight and how to take out Zeros by the two that we picked up that were somewhere on the Alaskan islands areas that we picked up. But their industry, they couldn't mass produce enough to keep those planes going compared to our production. Home production couldn't sustain the war effort. So, like Germany, uh, Japan's got about a 24-month window. They've got if they can't do what they need to do in 24 months, they won't. They'll never be able to do it. Um, Best merchant marine in the world, and once that disrupted, they can't get the food, the oil, the gas, all the supplies they needed. As long as there's not a war going on, they were just tops at it. But when the war broke out and we started to disrupt it, uh, the home production 20% of Japan's arable. The other 80% is beautiful. It's like a park area, and you can't grow anything on it that you need in foodstuffs. To this day, they produce more per acre than anybody in the world. That's how good they are with that. But that's still not enough. They have to import huge amounts of food supplies and things of that nature. So the home production couldn't do it. Yes, they've got a lot of sunflowers and sunflower seeds and things like that, but you can't win a war with those like that, right? Just couldn't do it. So they know they've got a stockpile. You can only stockpile so much. And so their production and airplane production, aeronauticals, not there. Okay. Heavy industry work outside the government's authority. That's the problem, right? Ours worked with the government. We federalized, took over the plants with the individuals, so we worked hand in hand with them. China basically did the same. Most countries did the same, but Japan, outside of government authority, that's a problem for them. The entire Japanese economy relied on shipping. What does that tell you? Planning strategy and tactics. Then, if you can control the shipping lanes, uh, it's not going to work for. That's why she needed China. You just look at that map. She moved out into the Pacific and got areas that basically she needed in order to sustain the greater East Asian co-prosperity sphere. In Europe, is better known as the Greater Reich. Same kind of thing. Um, on paper, they know they can't function in a war without the raw materials, without the food sources, without the slave labor, without the Chinese working for them in the Chinese plants. And so their goal was to keep Chiang Kai shek from bombing mainland China because that would stop production. So, one way to do that is to put the plants in Korea, Vietnam, other places off the Yellow and Yangtze River so that Chiang Kai shek would be ending up bombing his own people, which they wouldn't like. And so lots of strategy comes in for food production, equipment, military items. All the fine ground glass for all of their optics, of course, still made in Japan. Um, they received that from the Germans from East Germany, and the company is called Zeiss. Well, they didn't like that name, so they took the Zeiss lenses and created something else called Nikon. Okay, they have to import 60% of the raw materials. Too high. Um, Countries that import less than 20%, 25%, you're in a good range. If you import less than 10%, that's wonderful. What you have to do is the more self-sufficient you are, you're better because you have to get these raw materials there, and they couldn't do it, not on a regular basis like that. There it is, stockpiled. She was set up for 24 months. That was the plan that they had been working on for quite a while. It's about all they could stockpile. Uh, they were ready to go. So if they can't get what they want and sustain and create some kind of a peace agreement uh, with whoever they're warring at, it's going to be over. And it was. Um, 2 years is about it. They they went for broke, 41 and 42, and by that time, it's a downhill move. Germany gets into the same scenario. Italy gets there within a year, and the others will. The surrogate Axis powers will collapse as well um, because of economic resources, trade that they need supplies. 43 million barrels of oil, a lot of it purchased from the United States, from Russia. It's one reason why they have a non aggression pact with the Russians. They want Russian oil, is what they want to sustain that. One, she's heavy into ships, she's heavy into planes, she needs oil to work all the machinery, equipment, and everything that's there. You can only stockpile so much. Okay. Year two of the war, she imported 16 million barrels of oil, much more than she ever thought they would need. Okay. So when you're doing planning, you got to have the right kind of planners because you can't miss on it. Because without the oil and the fuel, many of the ships that when the war ended, and sometimes we need a lot more people doing research on World War II. Um, no one really looks at this, and I just kind of I stumbled on it because I was working on all this oil. The number of warships in Japanese ports, they plugged them all up, and I'm thinking like, wow, what's going on? What's going on? They didn't have enough oil or fuel or diesel, whatever they were using for the ships to work. They did to preserve some of those, which they didn't. They made a scale model, I think, of the Yamato that's in Japan now, and you can go look at it. It's 1/6 scale or something. But she had all kinds of other warships, and I don't know what we did with them all, whether they scrapped them all, but I've seen the picture. I went after the pictures. I wanted to know what kind of warships they were. I don't know how many submarines and all of that, but uh, all that's in Tokyo today. But given the world scene and what's happening, and I don't think I'll be there anytime soon. But they've got them. They've got all kinds of pictures and records there as well. They all didn't get destroyed, and so she's importing a lot of oil. This is year two of the war, so the stockpile is. They go through it very quickly. Year three of the war, 30. So look what happens. Almost doubles. Why? Well, she's spread out. You spread out so far, but then the country she takes over, if they're working for you, all their equipment's going to need oil because they're not importing it because U.S. ships aren't going into occupied Japan saying into the Dutch East Indies, well, here's some oil for you. That isn't going to happen. And so what happens is the demand for oil is really significant, and our submarines and others go after it. That's why I have you working on submarines. They're going after troop ships, sure, but they're going after a lot of supply ships as well. Once you cut off the means of war materials like we were doing in Germany, things begin to change. And this is where they were changing here pretty significantly. Okay. Strongest point was the Japanese merchant marines. They were the best in the world, the best navigators, the best ships. They've been doing it for years. And what happens is merchant marines, when the war comes along, they just keep doing it. But what happens is um, they get shot. People, get their ships get attacked and they need spare parts. And it's not like here we are in a nice movement from one island to the next. But hang on, let me get that.
I can just ask you, did they like overexpand themselves at all? Like, did they
Yeah,
absolutely
that's
need all
exactly
those
what
islands they took?
they did. They
Okay.
overexpanded. They were too greedy to set up this greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. And the areas they went into, some of them were welcoming the Japanese to come in to get rid of the Dutch. Well, after the Japanese were there for a while, the Dutch thought, and the local inhabitants, boy, did we make a mistake because they shorted them on oil, food, and supplies. And they thought that the Japanese would be more gracious because we're all into this Asia together. So when they plotted where they were going to go and set, you know, the stakes and the water and the ground of what they were going to cover that I have on that map for you. Um, It's called overshoot. They expanded too far. And once you get troops in certain areas, they're going to need regular supplies. And since their aeronautical expertise isn't high on the list, zeros don't drop supplies. How many of those big air transports did you see flying around Japan? They don't have many of them because they can't build them. And so everything's got to go by water, which we can disrupt. We've got destroyers, we've got cruisers, we've got submarines out there, and part of it is to disrupt that trade. Uh,
I just said peripheral holdings are very expensive.
yep, you got it. That's exactly right. Yep. And that's where the problems are going to be. The periphery is going to start to break away. And that's when MacArthur and others are there. We're going to go after these areas on the periphery to protect Australia, New Zealand, and then eventually the strategy of island hopping so that we don't have to fight on every island. And as they want us to fight, so it just basically bleeds us to death of our supplies. Okay. So under control of the Army and the Navy. Well, who's under the control of the Army and Navy? Right? The Merchant Marines. Wonderful. No, it's not. It's a problem. The Japanese Army and the Japanese Navy don't get along at all. No. Boy, they are like night and day. And in between is this ping pong ball called the Merchant Marine. Some of the Merchant Marine that ran the routes just were dyed in the wool for the Navy. The others were dyed in the wool for the Army, and they didn't like each other either. And so when you're divisive like that, that also hurts your ability to function on a war footing. Can't do that. Okay. December 1941, only 37% of the fleet was available. Okay. Right. That means we could almost say the rest of that merchant marine fleet was with the military. And 37 is a little high, but it's going to be there. You see, so what happens is this: if you've got a little less than 3/4 of your merchant marine fleet is with the military. What does that mean? So we can interpret it. We can deduce some things, right? Not only by logical reasoning, but the evidence is there is that the civilians are getting the short end of all this. And so the merchant marine is basically locked up to supplying whatever the military needs. And we're not going to bring what we've been bringing for the local people who depended on. They shipped out certain fruits and vegetables, or certain vegetables got certain fruits in, certain materials, silk, and all those things, because those islands don't produce all that. They don't have factories. The factories are located in one area, and the merchant marines got to bring them around, just like a grocery store. You know, different companies bring in different things and put on those shelves for you. Well, when they don't show up and there's not any bread, you're not happy. And when there's no milk, you're not happy, right? No chocolate chip cookies. You're wondering, where are the cookies? Somebody says, don't worry about them. The military's, don't say anything. They need them. Oh, yeah, okay, okay. Here's a banana. Like, well, okay. Big problem. You see, this is the internal workings of how you have to look at it before we start getting into fighting the battles. So we get, and the civilian population then becomes more attuned to the Allies saying, this is terrible to us. Why are you doing this to us? Well, we're in a war and this is the way it's going to be. So a lot of people start leaving those islands and just leave. And then pretty soon the Japanese got to force them to stay to do some work that they need on repair and supplies for them. Okay. So what this tells us is they're unable to win a long drawn out war. They're good for about 24 months of superior fighting and offensive work, and then they're going to drift back and see if they can hold on, and which they can. Okay. Japan's objectives. Okay. Here they are. It's a little short in there, but I can give them to you. Strike quickly. Surprise. Conquer the territory. This is their plan. I've taken it from the Japanese war plan itself. Wherever they're moving in those first 2 years, they're going to hit very quickly, conquer the territory, organize it, protect it, right? Fortify it against counterattacks, fight a defensive war, convince those conquered to support Japan, and harmonize all economies, right? That's what they're going to do. Look at the Philippines. Strike quickly, conquer the territory, organize it, protect it, fortify it, right, against any counterattacks. Now we're going to defend it and convince those there you're going to work for Japan and make our economy this greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. except the brutality quite didn't work in the Philippines. Some worked for collectively with the Japanese, others didn't. It varies by who's in charge of what and what's going on in that process. So that's taken right from their plan. It's all written in Japanese, and then they uh, years they translated all of this and put it into English and documents so we could look at it all. But that's exactly what their plan was. And number one, right out of the box, is that you see that at Pearl Harbor, you see it in China. They strike very quickly because they don't have time. They don't want to fight in an area for 6 months. They want to strike quickly and pull out, and then go somewhere else and do the same thing and put everybody on their heels. Okay, must complete before the U.S. can respond. Everything that I just gave you, it's like the sleeping giant. Um, if you read the documents prior to Pearl Harbor, there's the internal documents of the Army. The Army doesn't like what the Navy's up to, and basically the um, Japanese Army came to the conclusion that by attacking the United States is probably just, they don't use these words, but I'll use them, is about the worst thing they could do, because it's just, they didn't like that. But that's what the Navy sits at the top. They're an island community, a series of islands, and it's not a land army. It's not the old time of the shoguns. It's Navy. They pick all this up once we get there with Matthew Calbraith Perry, and they're going to build some ships, and they almost are as big as the British, but they got some problems with the ships as well. Too much armor on them. They're too heavy. Um, Ours are much different. They're carriers. They get overconfident in some of these airstrikes. Okay, the emperors followed the advice of his counselors. They listened to them. And instead of saying, no, we're not going to do that, if the counselors advise, the emperor generally goes along with it. Counselors are influenced by the military, either the army or the navy. And each one's got different objectives. Okay. Subordinates held the power. That means, like Tojo, the Hirohito is the emperor. Those that are underneath Yamamoto, those that are underneath the counselors, they held tremendous power. And so they often talk to the counselors to convince them what to do. They put the plan to the emperor. The emperor accepts what the counselor says. They've already know this is what the military wants, so they're going to move in that direction. So what you have at this point is a military dictator under Tojo. And I think I told you the story of that when in Pearl Harbor came along. Prince Kenoi wanted to meet with FDR, wanted to meet with him in Japan, I believe, and then in Washington, all that. So they finally agreed on it would be in Hawaii. Kenoi said we can work it out. They talk Roosevelt out of it later. Then they tell Kenoi and the emperor that Roosevelt's not coming. Kenoi loses face, and he's replaced by Tojo, who is a war hawk like you've never seen. Uh, and from then on, the military is entrenched until Tokyo Bay in 1945. Japan's greatest weakness: faulty organization and poor coordination. Mm-hmm. Say, boy, I haven't heard those before. Probably not, but these are the reasons. You want to know why Japan's not doing well? She's not well organized. I just gave you examples of how the Army and the Navy don't work. That's poor coordination, faulty organization, right? Putting that many troops on troop ships and seeing the troop ships go to the bottom like that. Okay. So you couldn't get the aeronautical organized, couldn't get the supplies, all that organized. Just even taking our prisoners of war clear up into northern parts of Japan and China and have them working in labor, or they'd be killed, or they wouldn't get any food. Um, Raw materials. Um, those are the two greatest weaknesses that she's got. Not very well organized. So when you look at war, and we're in the Pacific now, so our strengths are organization and communications, and she can't coordinate. uh, air, sea, land, all of those kinds of things. A lot of troops can't get to the islands when they need them. Uh, the officers, some are operating on their own. The supplies don't come up. Uh, I mean, their ships show up at the wrong place at the wrong time, and we're there wondering, like, where do they come from? Because we had intelligence, a certain thing. They get confused on a lot of this, and they would in these islands. If you've ever been to this part of the world, it's very confusing, and it's hard to coordinate and organize. And you think that's their history, but they're they're not very good at it because they haven't really launched themselves out into these areas. Who did were the Chinese, and they never used. They just attacked the Chinese constantly from 37 until 45. They should have used them for navigation in these areas. But those are the greatest weaknesses that she has. Okay. December 8th, 1941, the U.S. declaration of war. You know that. We've already covered that. Churchill to FDR. Um, the Anglo-American alliance, our number one enemy is Germany. And so when FDR gets that, I can tell you what happened in the Oval Office like that. He says, well, Pearl Harbor's just been bombed, and people on the west coast of the United States think we're going to be invaded. And we've got the Japanese and the Aleutians, and in Alaska, and there's zero planes up there. And Winston, we've got some other things to worry about right away. Yeah, we know that Germany is important like that, but we have some German subs off our east coast and off of Texas and Florida and things like that. But right now we this is a real dark time for us after Pearl Harbor. We've got to get ourselves ready to go here. It's a long way from the west coast of the United States, and so the whole country begins to lean into this, and people volunteer, and so the whole war effort uh, starts. And so FDR is. We know it's Germany and Japan, but for us right away, this is the Pacific is wide open, and the next stop could be Midway and landing at Pearl Harbor, west coast of the United States. What's going on? And so um, he communicates back to Churchill, but Churchill's very kind of dictatorial. He says, "Well, now that you're in the war, we've got to focus on Germany." Well, we will. 1944, D-Day, which we covered. This is 1941, so we're a little ways away from that. Okay, and so when Japan attacked in the Pacific, uh, they didn't even let Germany know, and the Emperor didn't know until after the attack. He didn't know. That's how secretively this Navy operation was with their Air Corps as well. Um, and I'm kind of it's hard for me to fathom that um, our spies and intelligence people didn't pick some of this up, because what they had done, they had found a um, island area off their real close to their main island, and uh, on the ground, actually on the in the water, they created the um, the Pearl Harbor scene with the battleships there, and they practiced that. And they must have been real secretively about doing it because it didn't come out. And I thought we might have been able to pick that up, uh, but we didn't. And what they found out when they practiced is when they dropped the uh, the torpedoes from the planes, the air torpedoes, that they figured from analysis, they had moles in Pearl Harbor, that the torpedoes um, the the water at Pearl Harbor was just too shallow for the torpedoes. So what they did is they had to put little like motors or wings, little fans on the torpedoes, so when they hit the water, they wouldn't go down too far, so they could go ahead and sink the ships. Now that takes some time, and a few years ago when I had a little more time, I was looking into that because I wanted to get that story. It was almost like false beaches. They had like a netting or a screen, a huge area that they covered. And these are people that in their early history, they used to do pond painting. And, you may not know what pond painting is, but if you went like into a swimming pool and you had certain paints, you could paint an image on the swimming pool on the water, and it wouldn't sink, and it wouldn't float away. There's ways you can do that, and then you put down the paper, and then it goes into that. That's how they created these huge murals and things out of different kinds of paper. But they knew to put this netting down, so when the pilots were coming in off of those carriers, they knew exactly the run. They knew what they had practiced that. It's like practice for a month or 2 weeks before you play a game, and when you get into the game, you've been practicing every day. So they practiced this run, and I always was amazed that we didn't pick it up. I can't, there were all kinds of other people that were in Japan at that time that may be Dutch and others that could have picked it up, but right now nothing's come up on it like that. So uh, they attacked in the Pacific, and Germany didn't. They were informed afterwards, which the German high command didn't like. Um, Russians didn't know. Nobody knew, as far as I know. Any documents, anything that find that anybody knew that that was coming, other than the story I told you of how they picked it up from a Japanese naval attaché, and I think it was in Chile, like that. Okay. December 11th, 41, Germany declared war on the United States, and we still wondering why they did that. What did we do? But because they're allied with Japan, they went ahead and did it. And when they did that, they lost the war. Both of them, when they attacking Pearl Harbor and Germany declaring war on the United States, it would only be a matter of time before that would happen. And after the war, I gave you what Albrecht Speer and others said. Uh, Lower level Japanese military officials that were attaches knew exactly the same thing by striking the United States at Pearl Harbor, is that sleeping giant. Uh, they said once you get those people by doing this, you'll have a eternal enmity by the people of the United States for a surprise attack. The emperor said that we should be warned ahead of time. Well, they warned us after the attack because the message didn't get to the Japanese representatives. That's the real story. That what happened is that they Tojo and others agreed with what the emperor, he said, tell them ahead of time that it's going to happen. And he did, but he may have delayed the communique. I'm not sure of that, but or maybe it just got transmitted late. Either it was on purpose or it was by accident, or they didn't get through. And we got it. It was delivered, and our people were stunned. It's like, yeah, tell us after the fact. Thank you so much. They were furious about that. Good area to look into. And so, why? Some reasons. What are they? Okay. Well, Admiral Donnett's subs could now move into the American neutrality zone. Okay, because people ask these questions. So I'm going to give you some answers, some reasons. There's a lot of them. We go back. Okay, why did Germany do this? Okay. Uh, because she wanted some things. See, there's always an opportunity. Everybody said, why? We didn't do anything. No, we didn't. But what they wanted was that subs could now move into the American neutrality zone, because we had certain zones of neutrality where certain ships could be protected. And now they could do that. That's what they wanted, because they still had this belief that, and they were right. The Atlantic, right? The Atlantic War. That's the longest battle for us in World War II. And that's where the war is won, other than when they attacked us at Pearl Harbor and Germany declared war on us. It's the Battle of the Atlantic. And so Germany had the edge. Remember, I gave you those submarines and how she was doing at the beginning? Oh, yeah, she's doing much better at the beginning of the war, because they move into the neutrality zones. They're not neutral anymore because now we declared war. And so the linkage with that, we can make an inference out of it, but we got a good deduction, is that that's what the German high command wanted. That's what Donitz wanted. That's what the Navy wanted. And so the German high command agrees and said, okay, declare war on the United States, because the Navy's we're going to win the war there in the Atlantic. He knew that. The German Navy knew it. Unfortunately, it didn't pan out the way that they thought it would be, because they also have a manufacturing production problem, a big one like that. And Donitz told him that he wouldn't be ready for war until 1945. Well, they started September 1st, 39. So even if he gets, even because the U.S. is no longer neutral, they're still they're too far behind to catch up. It's not going to happen. No. Right. And so Germany then will not have to worry. Here's some of the reasons about flags uh, on merchant ships. They could just sink anything, right? And so they had to be careful because they couldn't be sinking our ships because we were neutral, and then we had neutrality zones that our ships are in here. And if there's other ships in here, stay out of those zones because we're neutral and they're dealing with us. You can't come into these areas. Oftentimes, this gets left out of a lot of textbooks and a lot of movies and things like that. They don't go into all that, but this is a much broader war than many people understand. That's why it's called a world war. If I gave you a list of who declared war, you would think it would be as big as a 3-inch old phone directories. Okay, and that's what they wanted to do. They knew if anybody in the German high command knew how to win that war, and the Navy, Donitz, and he's got, to me, the brightest military minds. I know Albrecht's Spear was one, and the people at Poonemunde and the people in Berlin working on atomic research. But the greatest military strategists were in I think, the German Navy because they knew. We knew it as well. We knew that whoever, the Atlantic War is it. And, I didn't spend a whole lot of time on it. One of these days, I'm going to give a topics course just on the Atlantic War so I can talk more about our submarines of the Atlantic. And you're working on subs in the Pacific, which is also important. Oftentimes underestimated and overlooked, but they shouldn't be because we took the German Navy on those submarines and what they were doing. And in addition to our Air Corps, I gave you that as well. But boy, we really wreaked havoc with them and got our troops over there, got our supplies over there, ran the convoy system. And you win the Atlantic War, you win the whole thing. And we did. 6 hours after Pearl Harbor, right? Admiral Stark, Chief of Naval Operation, issued the order. And it's the orders to be on alert now, be on guard. We've been attacked at Pearl Harbor. State of war exists even before Roosevelt declared it. When they attacked us, it's not, well, we got to wait for FDR to go to Congress and things like that. Everybody thinks that's true. We didn't declare war, but a state of war existed. We were attacked. And it's very important just to understand that is that for us, a peace-loving nation, we're at Pearl Harbor, we're attacked. 6 hours after that, Chief of Naval Operations issues orders to all of our ships operating that a state of war exists between Imperial Japan and the United States of America. So be on guard, be ready for action. You don't say, hi, how are you? We're here. I guess there's some trouble. No, you either attack or take a defensive position. That's what you got to do. And then FDR, in order for us to go to full war footing and continue, but we're going to protect ourselves. He then goes to Congress the next day on December 8th and asks for the declaration of war. So we officially declare war. But we are at war when the first bomb hits at Pearl Harbor, when those warplanes come over. Just by seeing them before they even do anything, a state of war exists. Okay. Execute unrestricted air and submarine warfare against Japan. That's the order that goes out. It was a coded message, a lot of dashes and all kinds of things were put into it like that. And so I've got a lot of those documents and I've used them in class before because, someone said, well, we weren't at war. I said, yes, we were. When you saw hostile planes flying over Pearl Harbor, everybody knew. I mean, that's how this country is operated in war. We just don't wait because unrestricted, I tell them right away, you have no restrictions. You see anything that's Japanese, you go after it. Boom. You got full authorization to do it. And that comes from, it comes from our commander in chief, who then has to deal with the military right away and tell them, go. Then he goes to Congress and everybody else comes in. But 6 hours after that, after the mayhem, they get communiques to Washington. FDR issues the order, and it comes down through the secretary of our Secretary of War, Secretary of Defense, to all the naval operations, and the chief of naval operations sends it out to every ship that's out there because they don't know what's going on. I mean, it takes a long time for certain areas to figure it out, but our ships knew right away. Absolutely. 24 hours before Pearl Harbor, the U.S. government switched from research on atomic bombs to the development of a atomic bomb. You know that? Mm-hmm. Yeah. 24 hours before Pearl Harbor, our government switched from research to the development of an atomic bomb. So we knew that note that I told you where Roosevelt turned and says, Hopkins says, um, the Roosevelt says, "Well, this means war," and Hopkins says we should strike first, and Roosevelt says, "No, we can't. We're a peace-loving nation like that." I think, and where was it going to be? I think they were talking about the Philippines, but no matter what, the order was given. So 24 hours before, we knew that there was going to be an attack somewhere. They write all these books and all these articles that we knew they were going to bomb Pearl Harbor. We didn't know. We knew they were going to bomb somewhere. Most of our intelligence said they were going to bomb um, in the Philippines, and we were somewhat prepared in the Philippines. But you're never prepared; you just don't know. But the order was given. So our people are smart. We knew it was coming. Maybe 24 hours. It's like, well, we're not sure. But when the time came, that 24 hours before Pearl Harbor, our researchers are on the development of an atomic bomb. Okay. Uh, they waited for the official word and they got it. We were told, we're not doing research anymore. You're going to develop one. Boom. All right. So there's some indication that we know there's going to be an attack. Where did we know it was going to be? Who knows? They attacked all over the Pacific, in Singapore, in Malaysia. It just wasn't Pearl Harbor that got hit. The whole Pacific areas got hit. Oftentimes that gets left out. You got to read FDR's war message, and he goes into that in some detail. Weeks before Pearl Harbor, the Chicago Tribune published Washington's war plan called Rainbow Five. Mm-hmm. I don't think we'd be doing those things any longer like that. Yeah, you can look it up. I mean, I've got all that, but I don't have time to put it on the screen for you today. It's like that. Okay. That's how transparent we are. So when people say this government's not transparent, it just depends what kind of transparency you're talking about. But uh, Rainbow Five is out there. There's other plans that we talked about, but they published the war plan. And so obviously the Japanese and the Germans and others picked it up, but that's okay. It's like anything else. You tell them, this is the defense I'm going to run. This is the offense I'm going to run. Here's the whole plan. See if you can stop us. And so after that, there was a little more of an interest, and maybe the government should step in and kind of, censor some things. Right. Yeah, there was a cry for that. Now, they didn't do it on purpose so that we would get that, but it's like we can't. People are going to get killed over this, and it could be, you know, your father or brother or sister or mother, and this is not good. We can't be doing this. We know we all want this freedom of speech and things like that, and of the press, but when there's this dangerous like that, better not to tell the enemy exactly what our war plan is. Rainbow Five. Yeah, you can look it up. Admiral Kimmel barred from active service by order of the president, forced to retire on March 1st, 1942, and he died in 1968. I've done a lot of work about Admiral Kimmel, right? Kimmel and Richardson. Well, they were at Pearl Harbor. Well, FDR listened to what his advisors said. Well, Tojo's taken over, Kanoi's gone. They're rattling their sabers, and what do we do? Said, well, that's what he suggests. Let's send the fleet to Pearl Harbor. It's exactly what the Japanese wanted. Yeah. And so March 1st, 42, Pearl Harbor's December 7th, 1941. Within a number of months, Admiral Kimmel here, mm-hmm, barred from active service, forced to retire. Okay. And then he died in 1968. And so these are, I don't know if you call them punitive actions, but the idea is that if Japan was rattling its sabers and talking about war out in those areas, and we send the fleet there, we should have already been on a war footing, shouldn't have we out there? Luckily, some of the ships weren't in the harbor, But if a war's footing is like that, then maybe you could move the ships all over. I don't know. There's other things that the Navy could have done, but you can read all of this. It's an interesting commentary as to what happens here, is what FDR does, and the recommendations by the military. February 23rd, 1942, Japanese subs, right? Yeah. hmm Where are they? Well, they're off the coast, California. Wow. How they get that close? Well, they're there. I doubt if they were ever in San Francisco Bay, but I can't disprove any of that. But there's big concern um, that as we get into this, after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, and we get into the new year, that there's this question about the possibility of landing on the coast of California. And in order to do that, one way to do that is to get your submarines in there so we can get an idea of the terrain and where these landings of ships might be able to be. All right. So that tells you, as the intelligence comes in and gets to Washington, that if there's submarines that have been sighted, or at least that's alleged submarines, they don't advertise it, uh, that the idea is Midway, Hawaii, and then the west coast of the United States. We do know a lot of balloons were flown over California, and we know that areas there was some bombing and shelling in these areas, and the newspapers published it as some wayward campers who just dropped some, you know, lanterns and maybe cigarettes, and we got little forest fires out there. Well, wasn't any campers. There was other activity going on like that. An area that needs a little bit of research. Um, I don't know if those files are still closed or not, but we can get the Japanese logbooks of some of those submarines to see where they were going and where were our subs. What was going on in January and February 1942, right after the bombing of Pearl Harbor? Were those subs already there before Pearl Harbor and we didn't spot them or pick them up, right? Were they looking at the fleet long before the fleet ever left the west coast of the United States? I'd like to know who those captains were, those submarines, and where our coastal defenses were. What were they? So, other areas to look at. Okay. 1940, many high school graduates wanted to join the Navy. Why? Yeah, we're coming out of the Depression or trying to come out of the Depression and they can't get jobs. Mm-mm. And they wanted to get fed 3 meals a day. They didn't have money to buy a lot of clothes. A lot of them were sick. If we look at most of our military, uh, you look at the uniforms and you say, gee, they must have taken this uniform to the cleaner so many times. It's so small. No, we all weren't over 6 foot. There was 5'5" to 5'8", 5'9", 5'10", but they needed food. Mm-hmm. Why? $20 a month, 3 hot meals a day, and a place to sleep, travel, and you got clothing. Yeah, and people complain today. Mm-hmm. $21 a month, 3 hot meals a day, real coffee with sugar and cream, right? $21 a month. That's what you got. Okay. Everything else taken care of. Place to sleep, fresh air, travel, and clothing. Okay. Mm-hmm. Since the end of World War One, the U.S. is in what we call a major drawdown period. Uh, and that means drawing down the military because we didn't put the money into it. We're not taking people in, so to get in, you had to be pretty good. And so, 1940, the world's heating up because we're at war. Not we, the world's at war. Japan's at war with China starting in 1937. Europe's at war starting September 1st, 1939, and then we end up with the United States getting a little nervous about all this, and the renewal of the Selective Service Act, the draft passes by only one vote. And now we're still into this drawdown period. In 1940, the Navy was starting to pick up, and so these graduates out of high school signed up for the Navy because one didn't have the resources to go to college, and they couldn't get a job. And that whole job area is going to pick up after Pearl Harbor. There'll be plenty of jobs for everybody, and that pulls us up out of the depth of the Great Depression. Okay, so no jobs even in the military during the time period. No. Yep. No, not there. Wow. Mm-hmm. So what happens? Okay. Well, you know what happens. Pearl Harbor. Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. All right. Give me just we're out of time here, and I got to switch over. Um, the average crew on a battleship was 1,600 men, right? Carrier 2,100, right? Okay. Last one for today. Not this one. One more. So that's the average crew of a battleship, 1,600. Carrier, 2,100. The fleet at anchor, it's the Army's job to protect and defend the fleet. Okay. Wasn't the Navy. But Admiral Richardson was there, but Admiral Kimmel paid the price. Um, Forced to resign. Yeah. Fleet at anchor. It's the Army's job is to protect and defend the fleet. Okay. And they did the best they could with what they had. There's no question about that. Okay. You don't wake up in the morning and think that you're going to see all these Japanese planes coming over like that. That was a shock to everybody. Okay, that's all we're going to do for today. Next week, I'm going to get into uh, Okinawa and Iwo Jima. Spend half the time, about 30 minutes on one, 30 minutes on the other, and that's not doing any justice at all. It should be a whole course on the battle of the war in the Pacific, but I'll do what I can. So thank you all for coming today. I really appreciate it. Keep up the good work. If you have any questions, please send me an email. I'll be happy